I think what they do is they construct very durable narratives about people who refuse to go along. So in general, when I hear the word consensus, my initial hit on the word consensus is negative. Why is that? It's because if everybody agrees that something is true, like 2 plus 3 equals 5, you don't need a consensus. Nobody talks about the arithmetic consensus. Everybody who doesn't subscribe to the arithmetic consensus goes nowhere. They can't build a house. They can't handle money. Okay, so there's no need to call it the arithmetic consensus. On the other hand, if things are actually open-ended, very rare for people to all bunch together around one set of tentative ideas. So what you find is that in general, you would expect a cacophony of people, each with their own pet ideas when things are genuinely uncertain, or you would find everybody falling in line when more or less it's clear that the world goes one particular way. So in general, I think what's going on with a consensus is that a consensus is usually achieved through some sort of incentivizing people, as the mobs, the violent mobs in Mexico say, plato o plomo. Do you want silver or do you want lead? So you're given a certain amount of encouragement to come to a particular perspective, maybe in terms of grant money or speaking opportunities, and you're given a disincentive, which is this is what's going to happen to your career if you don't fall in line. And so using a plato o plomo model, you suddenly get a lot of people pretending that they all agree to some kind of consensus position.
Consensus thinking almost destroyed the financial system in 2008. Eric had been warning about the danger of mortgage-backed securities since 2002.
I got very involved in economics, tried to bring some of the discipline that came from theoretical physics and differential geometry into neoclassical economic theory. We were some of the first people to become alarmed about the role of mortgage-backed securities and their ability to potentially blow up the world economic system. By 2008, it had become clear to everyone that we had built a massive society-wide fiction, which the Mandarins had called the Great Moderation. And this is one of the things that gives me confidence that when large numbers of well-credentialed and well-spoken experts sitting in the most powerful positions in your society all agree on something, you should not be intimidated or cowed, because what's quite possible is that groupthink has taken over the entire system. And after 2009, when we held a conference at the Perimeter Institute, where we tried to bring in people from outside the financial community to look at the financial crisis.
Welcome to the Economic Manhattan Project.
I got a very good view of why and how the individual expert communities resist visitors from other fields, because the visitors from other fields don't have any allegiances. And the people who are in that particular field have built up to very defensive positions. So I got a chance to see, well, what happens when you bring mathematicians, computer scientists, theoretical physicists, corporate executives to look at the financial crisis. The guys who are actually doing finance get very freaked out and they circle the wagons. People sense that there's something about the incentive structures that makes the conclusions untrustworthy, even when the conclusions are right. And sometimes the conclusions of the consensus are right. That's not the issue. I think climate is a situation which my guess is that the climate consensus is probably correct in some sense. But many of us are very disturbed by our ability to see incentives pushing people to hold certain conclusions. So I think that structure is enforced by taking anyone who's outside of the consensus and attaching concepts to their name. So one of the experiments I tried was controversial Professor Paul Krugman versus controversial Professor Jordan Peterson. Paul Krugman has been a controversial professor for decades, but there wasn't a single hit on all of Google for the phrase controversial Professor Paul Krugman, because this is one of the tricks inside of what I've called the gated institutional narrative, or the gin. So in the gin, the way it works is that you have these set phrases. Could be, controversial strongman Bashar al-Assad. Okay, well, what is that telling us? It's the news media opining that we should be picking a side and that he should be on the opposite side. So when you have a situation where the news media wants to promote somebody like Paul Krugman, they don't call him controversial Professor Paul Krugman. They call him New York Times columnist or Nobel laureate Paul Krugman. But if it's Jordan Peterson and Jordan hasn't signed up for some sort of consensus position, he has to be controversial Professor Jordan Peterson. Now, it's true that he's a controversial professor, but that's actually the gated institutional narrative's special language for telling the audience who the good guys and the bad guys are. And if you go back to professional wrestling, this would be called heels and baby faces, or faces. And so the idea is that Paul Krugman would be a face and Jordan Peterson would be a heel, but instead of being open about the fact that wrestling is a simulated performance sport, in the journalistic endeavor, we pretend that journalism is actually a search for truth, which I find hysterically funny.
And you've described this as kayfabe in the past. So
Right.
Can you explain what that is to people who've maybe not heard that term?
Sure. I think one of the problems is that we don't have good language for dealing with multi-layered deception. And the two places that I thought had pretty good language were the intelligence community and professional wrestling. So professional wrestling was the easier, it's hard to get spooks to give up their secrets. So what I did is I started to look into professional wrestling and what are all of the terms that they have to maintain to keep track what the actual storylines are, what the simulated storyline. Sometimes you have a simulated storyline that apparently breaks into actual reality, or like you're breaking the fourth wall, but it's actually a controlled structure where you're still in a fake story. So they call things that are fake works, and they call things that are real shoots. So a worked shoot is actually something that is set inside of a fake storyline, is apparently real and breaks the fourth wall, but is in fact fake. So you're talking about tertiary and eventually quaternary levels of deception. I don't think the human mind can do much more than 4 layers of lying. But kayfabe is the organized structure of lies that undergirds professional wrestling and is kept it as a simulated sport for about a century. All sorts of human activity veer between utter terror and boredom. And why is that? Well, because if something is actually an unbounded negative potential experience, people are very hesitant to engage. So if 2 wrestlers can really do damage to each other, they're going to circle each other for a very long time before engaging because they don't want to risk anything that they don't have to. So you could have bouts that would go on for 4 or 5 hours and basically nothing happened. Well, this is true in all sorts of endeavors. People in the know in finance don't really want to risk their money. So they come up with all sorts of elaborate ways to make sure that they're going to be okay no matter what happens. In politics, the same is true. Nobody wants to simply find that they're out of a job because they lost an election. So there's an elaborate revolving door between politically related occupations like punditry or lobbying and actually being a representative. So you have all sorts of fakery that is intended rather to make stable careers for the participants and to present an engaging and regular product for those in the audience. And so I believe that in some sense what you're seeing is what I call K-fabrication, where real activities that are dangerous and or boring tend to get sanitized by the participants so that they can present an as-if product to those outside of the structure and not themselves get hurt and continue to make money off of it. And I think that that's what happened in professional wrestling. There's a real competition for airtime, for fame, But there's a fake competition, which is a scripted series of pretend bouts where the decisions are actually known in advance. And that's very similar to what I see happening in war, in finance, in media, and particularly journalism.
I think you've spoken before about the sense that these systems get weaker and weaker as they continue. Why do you think that is?
Which systems?
Well, the political system, for example. That it seems that as time has gone on, the choices that we're being given in the political system get weaker and weaker.
Well, because you're systematically driving out the people who should be trying to lead. You're making it so unpleasant to hold real opinions, to have real integrity. You're driving the costs of the specific group of people we need so that instead the only people who are going to show up are the people that